My name is Claire Montgomery, and I used to believe dignity was something you could never lose in one night. I was wrong. That night, under the soft lights of my own birthday celebration, I learned that humiliation can bleed through silk faster than truth through gossip. It started with a glass of red wine and a smile that could slice marble. Lydia Cross, my daughter-in-law, stood across the room holding a crystal glass. The picture of charm and confidence. Her blonde hair gleamed under the chandelier as she glided toward me. Her heels clicking like a countdown. "You look beautiful tonight, Claire," she said sweetly. Before her hand tilted ever so slightly, the wine spilled down the front of my navy gown, dripping like blood from a fresh wound. The room fell silent. 30 guests watched as I froze, feeling the silk cling to my skin. Lydia gasped theatrically, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh no. I'm so clumsy," she cried, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, with a voice just low enough for only me, she whispered, "Now you finally look like you belong." Her mother, Evelyn Cross, let out a slow, deliberate clap from across the table. That sound sharp, echoing cut through the quiet like a verdict. My son, David, shifted his eyes to his phone, pretending to type. "It's just a dress, Mom," he muttered, his voice small, his spine smaller. I smiled tightly, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a scene. Around me, the chatter slowly resumed, cautious and thin, like people trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed cruelty. My dress was ruined, my dignity hanging by a thread. But I remained still, studying the faces that turned away. Inside, something old and cold stirred a version of myself I thought I'd buried with my husband's death. The judge in me, the woman who once handed down justice, not mercy. Lydia thought she'd embarrassed me. What she didn't know was that she'd declared war. I lifted my chin, met her eyes, and let a small smile form. "Thank you for the toast, Lydia," I said quietly. It was enlightening. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. In front of me was a folder I hadn't opened in months, my personal financial records, page after page. I traced every check, every transfer, every so-called loan I'd made to David and Lydia since my husband's death. $48,000. All gone under the promise of being temporary help. I'd always believed in giving without keeping score. But that morning, I started keeping score. I circled each payment with a red pen, the same color as the wine that had stained my dress. Every circle was a reminder of how blind I'd been. Lydia didn't just want to embarrass me, she wanted to erase me, financially and emotionally. When David arrived later that afternoon, flowers in hand and guilt in his eyes, I let him speak first. He apologized for the party, calling it a misunderstanding. I asked if it was also a misunderstanding that he and his wife had taken nearly $50,000 and paid back none. His face changed, first confusion, then panic, then shame. He mumbled that Lydia was handling their finances now, as if that somehow excused his ignorance. I listened quietly, then slid the folder toward him. Each page was marked, dated. Undeniable. He scanned the numbers, his lips parting but no sound coming out. For the first time, he looked like the child I used to defend, not the man who had defended someone else's cruelty. When he left, the flowers sat untouched on my counter. That night, I locked the folder in my desk. It wasn't just proof of what they owed, it was my first weapon. Lydia might have controlled my son, but she'd made one fatal mistake. she'd underestimated the woman who used to sentence liars for a living. By Monday, my anger had cooled into something sharper focus. I called an old colleague from my years on the bench, a retired investigator named Paul Grant. He'd handled evidence for half the cases that crossed my courtroom, and I trusted him to find the truth buried under Lydia's polished smile. Look into her background. I told him. Everything. The marriages, the money, the lies. Paul worked quickly. Within 48 hours, he handed me a file thick enough to make my stomach turn. Lydia Cross had been married twice before meeting David, both unions ending in financial ruin. Her first husband lost his small construction company after Lydia used his signature on business loans he never approved. The second, a restaurant owner, filed for bankruptcy less than a year after their divorce, claiming irreconcilable theft. I sat at my dining table that night, reading every word, my pulse steady but cold. It wasn't just deceit, it was a pattern. Lydia had built a career out of charming, draining, and discarding men who trusted her. She'd perfected her role, the grieving partner, the misunderstood woman, the victim of circumstance, and now she was playing the same part with my son as her latest audience. The next morning, I called Evelyn Cross and asked if we could meet for tea. She accepted instantly, sounding pleased, maybe even triumphant. Her home was as curated as her daughter's life, white columns, soft jazz, the faint smell of expensive candles. She greeted me warmly, pearls shining at her throat. "How lovely to see you, Claire," she said, pouring tea as if this were a social visit. I waited until the second cup before mentioning Lydia's first two husbands. Evelyn's hand trembled, just slightly, before she set the teapot down. "You can't blame Lydia for surviving the way I taught her," she murmured. For a moment, we both understood what she'd confessed. As I left her pristine house, the air outside felt lighter, cleaner. Now I knew the truth. Lydia hadn't simply married into my family, she'd infiltrated it. And thanks to her mother's careless honesty, I finally had proof that the disease ran in their bloodline. That Sunday evening, I invited David and Lydia to my house under the pretense of wanting to clear the air. They arrived, dressed as if for a magazine shoot, David in a crisp shirt, Lydia in a pale silk blouse that shimmered like her false sincerity. The dinner table was set neatly, a vase of white lilies between us, their scent sharp and clean, like judgment waiting to be delivered. I had spent the entire day preparing what truly mattered, the evidence. We ate in strained politeness, the kind that hides resentment behind silverware. When dessert was served, I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of marriage certificates, divorce records, and the bankruptcy filings from both of Lydia's former husbands. Lydia blinked once, then smiled as if she'd just been shown a harmless curiosity. "This is absurd, Claire," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "You've been misinformed." David's face went pale as he scanned the documents. "Is this true?" he asked quietly. But Lydia's charm didn't falter. "Your mother is obsessed," she said. "She can't stand that you chose me." I let her finish her performance before I reached for the small remote beside my plate. One click, and Evelyn Cross's voice filled the room from a hidden recorder, her calm, unmistakable admission. "You can't blame Lydia for surviving the way I taught her." For a moment, silence devoured everything. Lydia's eyes darkened, her smile collapsing into fury. She slammed her glass onto the table, wine spilling like accusation. "You can't ruin me," she shouted, her voice raw, stripped of polish. I leaned forward slightly and met her glare. "I already did." I said softly. David sat frozen. Torn between disbelief and heartbreak, Lydia grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels cracking against the hardwood like distant gunfire. David stayed seated, his hands trembling against the papers. She lied to me, he whispered. I didn't answer. The truth didn't need defending, it stood there, loud and undeniable. In Evelyn's voice echoing through my home. 3 nights after the confrontation, the fire came. It was just past 2 in the morning when the smoke alarm shrieked, dragging me out of sleep. I stumbled down the hallway, the air already thick and bitter, and pounded on David's door. Flames crawled up the side of the house, licking through the curtains of my study like they had a personal grudge. We escaped barefoot into the cold night, watching as half the home I'd built with my late husband went up in orange light. The fire trucks arrived fast, but not fast enough to save what mattered. The captain told me the blaze had started near the back porch, likely caused by an accelerant. That word, accelerant, hit me harder than the smoke. Someone had done this on purpose. David's jaw was tight as he spoke to the officers, his voice shaking between anger and disbelief. It's her, he said. It has to be Lydia. I wanted to believe he was wrong, but the timing spoke for itself. I'd exposed her lies, destroyed her image, and left her with nothing to lose. When people like Lydia run out of control, they set fires, sometimes literal ones. Later that morning, my phone rang. Her number flashed across the screen like a dare. I answered. Her voice was calm, almost amused. Tough night. Claire, maybe now you understand how it feels to have everything taken from you. I asked if she was proud of what she'd done. There was a pause, then a low, broken laugh. You destroyed my life. I'll burn every piece of yours. I ended the call and stared at my trembling hands. The fear I felt lasted only seconds before it hardened into something else. Resolve. I replayed the conversation, word by word, then saved the recording. Lydia had crossed the line from cruelty to crime. She wanted to play with fire. She just forgot I'd spent a lifetime knowing how to put it out. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and nerves. 6 months had passed since the fire, and the story had made its way through every local paper. Ex-realtor charged in arson plot against former judge. Lydia Cross entered the courtroom, looking smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a pale suit that tried to whisper innocence. She didn't look at me as she sat beside her lawyer, her posture rigid, her face carefully arranged. David sat beside me in the front row, his shoulders tense. It wasn't easy for him to watch the woman he once loved being tried for destroying everything we had left. But I knew this wasn't just my fight. It was his reckoning. 2. The prosecutor began with the simple truth. Lydia had hired a man named Tony Martinez, a small-time criminal, and paid him $5,000 to teach an old woman a lesson. Tony's testimony was unpolished but clear. He described meeting Lydia at Murphy's bar, how she'd shown him photographs of my house and told him exactly where to pour the accelerant for maximum effect. The defense tried to paint him as unreliable, a man desperate for a lighter sentence. But when the prosecution played the bar's security footage, Lydia sitting beside him, passing an envelope across the table, the room shifted. There was no charm left to hide behind. Lydia took the stand on the 4th day. She wept, spoke of betrayal, and painted herself as a victim of my vindictive crusade. She said she'd only vented her anger that night, never ordered anyone to act on it. Her voice trembled perfectly, like a rehearsed aria. For a moment, I saw jurors glance at her with pity, the way people still want to believe in beauty's innocence. Then the prosecutor played the recording of her phone call, the threat she'd made after the fire. Her voice filled the courtroom, calm and venomous, You destroyed my life. I'll burn every piece of yours." The silence that followed was heavy and final. Even the jurors stopped taking notes. When the verdict came, it was unanimous guilty on all counts. As the bailiff led her away, Lydia turned toward me, her eyes hollow but burning. I held her gaze and felt no triumph, only the steady weight of justice settling back where it belonged. 6 months after the verdict, my house stood tall again, rebuilt from the ashes with clean lines and brighter walls. Insurance covered the damage, but what it couldn't replace was the quiet peace that now filled every room. The ghosts of that night still lingered in small ways, the faint smell of smoke in the floorboards, the singed tree by the fence, but they no longer haunted me. They reminded me, instead of what I'd survived. David moved back in during the renovation. At first, out of necessity, then out of need. We worked side by side, repainting walls, choosing furniture, rebuilding something far more fragile than a house trust. He had sold the home he once shared with Lydia, paid back every cent he owed, and started his own design firm. Watching him rediscover his purpose was like seeing light slowly return to a place that had been dim for too long. On my 65th birthday, we hosted a small dinner, no grand toasts, no performance, just close friends, a few neighbors, and genuine laughter that came easily. David raised his glass, his voice steady, to second chances and lessons we never wanted, but needed. I smiled, feeling the weight of every word. Later that night, as I stood by the window, the city lights shimmered across the glass like scattered embers. I thought of Lydia, of everything she'd burned trying to destroy me. Yet here I was, standing stronger than before. Some fires cleanse more than they consume. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it struck a chord or reminded you of your own battles, share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of justice, strength, and redemption. Until next time, take care of your peace.